Welcome back to Amigurumi 101. In this video, I'll be explaining how to read an amigurumi crochet pattern. I wrote this pattern for Egbert specifically for this course, making sure that it is very beginner friendly. All right, let's begin. So before you get to the actual stitches in the pattern, it's usual that an author will include a list of materials as well as abbreviations. For the materials I've listed, I put the size of the crochet hook, the weights, and also the colors of each of the yarns, as well as other notions that are necessary in order to complete the piece. So you'll need stitch markers, sewing pins, some sort of stuffing. I specifically went with polyfill fiberfill, a tapestry needle, and scissors. For the abbreviations, these are pretty universal in any English pattern with US terminology. However, sometimes there are slight variations, which is why they are always listed at the beginning of a pattern. All right, so when I'm referring to a stitch, that will be denoted with an ST. If I'm talking about multiple stitches, that will be abbreviated with an STS. MC stands for magic circle. In other patterns, you might see MR, which is referring to a magic ring. Keep in mind, magic circle and magic ring are referring to the exact same thing. SC is for single crochet. INC is for an increased stitch. INV-DEC is for an invisible decrease. And then finally, when you are doing repeated sets of stitches, you are going to see them in brackets. Sometimes other authors will include them in parentheses. All right, so let's see it all in action. First things first, on this Egbert, you are going to complete the body. Since you have multiple colors of yarn, I also indicated in my pattern that you're going to be using white yarn for this section. All right, so within all patterns, you're going to be referring to the row or round, the number of stitches, and then the total number of stitches within that row or round. In all of my patterns, I use row universally, whether I'm working in a spiral or if I'm working in chains and then going back and forth between them. So keep in mind, I use them interchangeably. So even though this is completed in a round, I just say row at the top. All right, so in round one, what you're going to do is complete 6 single crochets in a magic circle. That will give you a total stitch count of 6. Since you're working in a magic circle, that means that you're actually going to be spiraling as you work on your piece, and you're going to be spiraling outward. So after you are done with your initial 6 single crochets, you're going to move on to round 2 and do 6 increased stitches. As a reminder, an increased stitch is just 2 single crochets done in the same stitch. So over here, that explains why your total stitch count is now 12, because you are looking in each of your previous stitches and you are putting 2 single crochets in each. Also, as a reminder, for every increased stitch that you see in a round, that will increase your total stitch count by 1. Moving on to round 3, you're starting to see the repetition in your pattern. So whenever I have a repeating set of stitches, I always put that in these square brackets. So you're going to look at what's in your square brackets and repeat it X amount of times. Specific to round 3 of this amigurumi, you're going to do a single crochet followed by an increased stitch, and you're going to repeat that process 6 times in order to complete this round. In order to double check that it makes sense with the total stitch count, you can count the individual stitches that you're going to be doing. So over here, a single crochet is just 1 stitch, whereas an increase is 2 stitches in the same stitch. So that gives you 1 plus 2, that's 3 stitches that are going to be repeated for a total of 6 times. So 3 times 6 is how you get a total stitch count of 18. Very similarly, for round 4, you are going to have a single crochet followed by an increase, and then you see the repeating sets again. So in each repeated set, you are going to do 2 single crochets followed by an increased stitch. Those stitches in the brackets are the ones that you are going to repeat for a total of 5 sets. After completing those 5 sets, you are going to finish off this round with a single crochet. That will result in 24 total stitches in this round, which makes sense because going back to check the math, you have 5 increased stitches that are done within this set over here, and then you have another increase that is not included within this set for a total of 6 increases. And if you're looking at your previous round, you had 18 plus 6 gives you 24. All right, so how do you read the invisible decreases? So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. All right, so over here in round 25 is when you start seeing the invisible decreases. So over in this set of repeating stitches, you're going to do 7 single crochets followed by an invisible decrease, and you will repeat this set 6 times total. So when you're looking at your total stitch count over here, you'll notice that you have 6 stitches less than your previous round. So the math adds up over here. As a reminder, for each invisible decrease that you are stitching, your total stitch count should go down by 1. So again, it makes sense here that 6 total invisible decreases will result in a stitch count that is 6 lower than your previous round. After you complete this section of the pattern, which happens to be round 32, you're going to fasten off and weave the tail inside of the piece. So that will complete the body of your Egbert. Moving on, you're going to be creating 2 arms. So I gave you the instructions over here in order to make both of the arms. And then I included some assembly information. So in order to do the assembly, you're going to need to flatten each arm, vertically pin using your sewing pins. You're going to pin down an arm to the body between rows 14 and 20. You're going to be counting your rows starting off at the top of your piece because that's where your row 1 or round 1 is located. So you're going to count 14 stitches down. Each of these little kind of X shapes is a stitch. So you're going to count 14 rows from your first row down, and you're going to end up somewhere over here because this is where row 14 is. So you're going to pin your arm in place at the top. You're going to pin your arm in place at the bottom, which should be on row 20. And then you're going to use a whip stitch in order to sew those pieces together. After you have your first arm down, it says that you're going to horizontally space the top of your other arm 24 stitches away from the first one. So you're going to count 24 stitches. In order to get to the other arm, you're going to pin the top of your arm to row 14. You're going to pin the bottom of your arm to row 20 as you did on the first arm. And then you're going to whip stitch those pieces together. After that, you're going to complete the feet and attach them to Egbert. You're going to make a tail, attach him to Egbert. And finally, you're going to make the belly and attach it to Egbert. Additionally, I embroidered a little face onto him. That is optional, and you can of course change up the face as you see fit. I just liked making little happy eyes and then a mouth in between. And there you have it. That is how to read an amigurumi crochet pattern. Before I leave, I want to make sure to indicate the importance of stitch markers. So, as stated in the total stitch counts for each of the pieces, you should have the correct number of stitches. If you don't, then that means that you are deviating farther and farther away from the intended goal. So if you don't have the correct number of stitches at the end of each round, if you continue further into your pattern, you're going to get further and further away from what you are actually aiming for. So I highly recommend using a stitch marker in the first stitch of each round or each row. That way, if you mess up and your stitch count isn't correct, you can easily remedy that and you can find where you should frog up to. So if you have no idea where the wrong stitches are located, I would recommend frogging the entire round and then starting from scratch so you can get to the correct totals.